Hello, I'm Chris Moon, a fellow artist manager, and I will be your guide through tough love, adventures, and artist management. In this episode, we shift gears a bit and explore the world of film and TV composers with my friend Tim Husom, whose Redbird music represents some of today's top composers, including Dustin O'Halloran, Colin Stetson, and the estate of Johan Johansson, to name a few. We discuss how his early days of managing indie rock and electronic bands, married with the economic downturn of 2008, inspired him to lean into film and TV opportunities for his artist, which led to his unique path towards redefining Redbird as a home for orchestral, ambient, and avant-garde music. His artists have won or been nominated for Academy Awards, Golden Globe Awards, Critics' Choice Awards, Emmys, BAFTAs, and the Grammys. I hope you enjoy my chat with Tim.
Sure, my name is Tim Husom. I have a music management company called Redbird Music. And our clients include A Winged Victory for the Sullen, Adam Wiltsey, Colin Stetson, Dustin O'Halloran, Pepijn Caudron, Rutger Hodemakers, the estate of Johan Johansson, and Volker Bertelmann, who also goes by the moniker Hauschka.
Cool. Thanks, Tim. Thanks for coming on.
Welcome.
Yeah, good to see you again. It's been a few years, I think.
Couple.
Yeah.
I don't remember last time I saw you. It could be that the last time I think that maybe I saw you was we were in Hollywood at some Italian joint near Amoeba having penne.
I think so. Yeah, that goes back a ways. Yeah, we first met when you were at Emperor Norton. But your entry into, I guess, the music industry goes back a little further than that. Do you mind kind of just giving us... We were talking offline a second ago about your history here in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, where I'm based currently. But yeah, maybe just kind of give a few touch points on some of those early experiences and how you ended up at Emperor Norton and eventually starting your own thing.
Oh, sure. So back in the day, when I lived in Minneapolis, I worked for a concert promotions company called Rose. And they were... the promoters of We Fest, and we did a Rolling Stones concert at the Metrodome once. Big time shows. So I was like a runner, intern, and somebody called for Gene, and I was answering the phones while they were playing golf, and they were looking for a guitar tech for a week because their band Rusty was going to be going out, starting in Minneapolis and then ending in Minneapolis. And so I said, I'll do it. I can do that for a week and live on a bus. And it's something that I wanted to do my whole life. And so, I convinced the manager, Sandy, to let me do it. And after the week was up, there was a show at the First Avenue. The guy that was supposed to take over for me had something to do with Shannon Hoon and Blind Melon. And so that was right at the time where Shannon Hoon passed away. And so the man who was supposed to come and take over for me was close to Shannon. And so he couldn't do it because he needed to, process and grieve. And so the band's manager said, hey, do you want to go out on the road for a year? And so that's how I started. And that's how I got kicked up to, I lived in after the touring days were over, so I lived in a tour bus in a van for a couple of years. Jeff Rogers he was the band's manager. He also managed the Crash Test Dummies at the time. And his company's name was Swell, but he also had a little label called Handsome Boy Records. And so he had me up there doing some marketing and some artist development stuff for both his management and record label. And that's right when Emperor Norton Records started. And Jeff, the owner of Swell and Handsome Boy, and Steve Prost, the owner of Emperor Norton Records, were friends. And Handsome Boy started taking over all of the label distribution and marketing, etc., for Emperor Norton in Canada. And we did a really good job. And we started to outsell the Americans by like 2-1 or something in Canada.
Oh, wow.
So Steve was in Toronto for a Zoo Bombs show, and he said, hey, would you ever think about coming to Los Angeles and working for me there? And I said, yeah. So, he flew me down to L.A., and I lived in a hotel for a couple of months, got a place, and, I just started doing the label stuff at Emperor Norton Records. I did a lot of tour stuff, a lot of artist development stuff. I did a lot of marketing things. So sort of a, back in the DIY, do-it-yourself label days, pre-MP3s, there was a lot to do. I mean, there was only like 4 of us to do it. So I cut a lot of teeth.
Yeah, no, it's a great way to get a nice round view and vantage point of at least that element of the industry. And coming from having that experience on the road and then learning the marketing ropes at an indie label, I'm sure kind of laid some nice foundations for the management aspect.
Well, it really helped management even today. I talk to a lot of my own clients about this when they go out on tour. It's like anything, unless you've been there and done it and been sleep deprived and didn't get vegetables on your rider and all of that stuff that people think that are just whiny musicians, it's so important because you don't have any time when you're touring. And so when you show up and there's not even like a poster on the club wall when all the rest of the bands have a poster on the club wall, that's a little deflating. And so it stuck with me. It's the importance of connecting the dots from all the different places, publishing, PR, radio, whatever it is, now digital. It makes a difference. And so, yeah, I think that it was a good skill for me to take into my management career.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. Unless you kind of walked a mile in those shoes, it's hard to even relate and steer an artist in the right direction when it comes to some of that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, that's great breeding ground for sure.
And empathize, because you've been on the back bench of a bus, And the other thing is, like, when you're on tour, I know this sounds like I'm complaining, but I'm not. When you're on tour, every night that you go into a different city, the party is waiting for you. So if you're tired or not, there's still a party. So there's still people on the bus, there's still people in the club, and you get tired and like partying became a full-time job.
Yeah, but doing that night after night wears on you, both physically and emotionally, I imagine, over time. So was the impetus to get into management predicated by the changes that occurred at Emperor Norton right around the time you and I met? I remember coming out and chatting with you guys about an electronic band I was managing called Venus Hum at the time.
Oh,
we were looking for a deal, and you guys had Ladytron, and we're one of the few indie labels really doing great work in that sector. And I remember you guys asking me a lot about Rykodisc because I managed Josh Rouse on Rykodisc, and then shortly thereafter, you guys ended up, Emperor Norton ended up being, I guess, purchased or joining forces with Ryko to some degree.
Yeah.
Was that kind of the shift that kind of pushed you towards starting your own thing?
Yeah, sort of back to what we were talking about before, because at that point in my life I had done a little of a lot. Like I knew a lot about radio and press and touring and all this stuff. It just started, some of the management that I was working with at the time on the label side, I was basically an extension of their team to some point. Like, especially because in Emperor Norton, we had Dutch bands and Japanese bands and Norwegian bands. And so I was boots on the ground management rep for them by default. And, I felt like at the time, I was like, wow, I'm not like, I have confidence in doing this because I've been doing it my whole life, it seems like. And so when Rykodisc bought Emperor Norton, and I don't really know exactly why, I think it had something to do with, Emperor Norton was owned by Geddes, and when we started to make money, it stopped being a hobby tax write-off, something like that. So Rykodisc bought Emperor Norton and then folded it like 9 months later.
Yeah.
I discovered unemployment insurance, and I'd only ever heard of it in my life, right? I've only ever been like, wait, I pay into this thing, but what is it? It's because I was laid off. I explored it. I was like, what is this? And so I started to get, some help from the government. And then I called my dad and I said, hey, tell me a little bit about this unemployment insurance, because I really didn't have anything. I had no idea what it was supposed to be there for. And he basically said, it's there to help you start something new when you lose your old gig. And so I was like, shit, man, I've always wanted to have my own company. And I've always wanted to like try to be a music manager, because I feel like I had enough skills to be able to fake it till you make it. You know,
Right.
I could do that. So I convinced a couple of people to let me manage them. And at the same time, to help make some ends meet, I started a poster production company, and we did a bunch of tour or concert posters for Golden Voice. And then I started managing this Mexican wrestling show called Lucha Vavoom, which was super fun.
That sounds insane.
Because I was fearless, because I was like, oh, I can get us on Love Lines. I can get us on this. I can get us on that. I was a little bit naive, but sometimes being a little bit naive is your greatest asset.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I was able to do a lot of stuff with that Mexican wrestling show. So, yeah, that brought me into the management company. And so that was in 2006. And so, I slowly started doing management for indie rock bands. And then Ladytron, who I knew from my Emperor Norton Records days, they were looking to make a change and called me and asked me to be their manager. And I was like, oh, so I actually have a roster now that can make money, and this can actually happen. So that's kind of what happened at that point.
Yeah, that's great. It's so endearing that you mentioned the whole unemployment thing. That was the impetus for me starting this podcast. I was also unemployed and laid off. And I don't know if I would have had the time to focus on developing something like this without having, the space in that given moment to explore it further. So, quite. That's a narrative that I don't hear as often as probably should be put out there when it comes to huge life and job shifts. There is opportunity that can be born out of that if you treat it that way. That's so great to hear. And so coming out of that experience and getting to kind of sink your teeth into management full on, one of the things I love about your career arc is how that's involved even within the scope of management. You primarily went from, as you mentioned earlier, managing indie rock electronic bands into managing artists that are composers for film and TV. So what was the big shift that occurred there? Because I find that incredibly fascinating and interesting, because I know so many artists that I either worked with or are friends with that love the composing aspect, and are always, and it's kind of very mysterious as to how any of that works. So I definitely would love to hear what pulled you and drew you into that world, and obviously how it kind of differs as far as, and also is similar to sensibility-wise, that overall management scope.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty cool story. Well, at Emperor Norton, the Gettys are, they are related to the Coppolas. I don't know how, but they are somehow. And so Peter Getty, who owned Emperor Norton, told Sofia Coppola, hey, I have this cool little indie record label in LA called Emperor Norton Records. And so, we were able to do Sofia Coppola's first couple of soundtracks, Lost in Translation and The Virgin Suicides. Not the Air album, but we actually did the source music soundtrack. So not the score soundtrack, the source music. And those, when that happened, we were like, wow, we didn't really have to do anything to sell those. We were like,
the movie markets the soundtrack in a sense.
This was amazing. We were like, wow, this is so cool. So we ended up doing a Roman Coppola soundtrack after that. And Brian Reitzel, the composer and the drummer from Red Cross, he was Sophia's music supervisor through all this stuff. And so we became friends with him, Steve Pross mainly, and Brian became pals. But Brian and I became friends just because we liked each other. And I started managing at the tail end of all of this, I started managing this band called the Devics from LA. And in the band Devics was a piano player named Dustin O'Halloran. He taught himself how to play piano, and he was amazing. He's sort of like most comparable to Eric Satie. And he put out these piano solos, well, at the time, piano solo record on Bella Union in England. Mm-hmm. And actually, let me back up a second, because I'm missing a jumping off point. Oh, let me back up a step.
Sure.
So after the layoff period, when I started my management company, Redbird, in 2006, I was managing all these different various things: Ladytron, Seawolf, Great Northern, these rock bands. And then in 2008 and 2009, when the economy really went in the toilet, and we were all getting our music for free. Yeah. We were all downloading MP3s, getting them from our friends, etc. So, in the music business, I mean, it, we all had to sort of reinvent ourselves a little bit. I'm sure that Josh had to be like, oh, wow, I'm not making as much money as I did 2 years ago. I need to figure something else out.
Yeah, it's like that every year now.
Yeah, it's true. So
but yeah, it was a big seismic shift.
I internalized it, and I said to Dustin, at the time, I was reading this article, and I think it was the New York Times, and it was about entertainment dollars and what people were actually spending in 2008, 2009, and 2010, because everybody was broke. And this article said that they did this study, and nobody was spending money on entertainment anymore except going to the movies.
Oh, wow.
And the movie box office receipts were up like 20% in 2010, because this article quoted that people just wanted to get away from their life. They wanted to go into a theater for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, eat their popcorn, and be in a spaceship, right?
Yeah.
That felt good for $15. So I called Dustin, who had this beautiful piano record, and I said, Dustin, have you ever thought about scoring film? Because, I did a little bit of this back in Emperor Norton with the soundtracks, but I really feel like we need to try to get into this film world a little bit, because I see their budgets, and I just read this article, and I feel like we're struggling so hard. Maybe we should try to move into it, not get away from where we were, but move into the film world a little bit, because it seems like it's a little more stable, and I hate worrying about how I'm going to pay my rent.
Right.
So he said, well, that would be amazing. So the first call that I made was Brian Reitzel from Sofia Coppola.
Right.
So I went over to his house, and I called him and I said, Brian, I have this CD, I have this guy that I'm working with, Dustin O'Halloran. I went over to his house. We were having coffee. He pushed this magazine, Mojo, in front of me after I gave him the CD. And he said, do you mean this CD? And in it was a 4-star review of Dustin's Piano Solos record that he had just read. Oh, and I was I'm like, wow, that's cool. I didn't even know that happened. And so he's like, yeah. He's like, so tell me. He's like, because coincidentally, I'm working on this movie called Marie Antoinette right now with Sofia Coppola. And we're looking for these sort of period piece, gentle, simple, melodic piano tunes to carry some of the interstitial scenes. And I said, whatever we have to do, sign us up. And so Dustin ended up doing like 3 or 4 pieces. I think 2 of them were licensed and 2 of them were new. But we were able at that point to say we had music in a movie that we were part of.
Right.
So from there, I called my friend, I don't think I called him. I started calling everybody that I knew that had something to do with entertainment world in Hollywood. And Mickey Petralia, the producer of Beck and Dandy Warhols, he's a big-time producer, mixer. He actually produced one of the Ladytron records.
Okay.
He and I were just chit-chatting about it, and I was like, gosh, Dustin, he scored some of this movie, Marie Antoinette, but I need more for him. I need to carry this momentum out. And so he called me back like a week later, and he said, hey, my friend Karen Rachtman, the music supervisor, sister of Ricky Rachtman from MTV.
Oh, really?
Yeah. She's doing this film right now, and they need a composer, and it's an indie film, but they need somebody to do the music. And so she called me, and it was done. Like he had his first real full film. And then after that was done, 6 months later, she had another film. She called me and she's like, I need somebody to do this too. So that's how I took my first steps. That's how I got my feet wet into the sort of film world.
Yeah. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
No, it seems like you're incredibly methodical about the connection, leveraging those connections, however loose they were. And I think that married with Dustin's talent just probably was, a nice perfect storm of opportunity, being at the right place, right time to kick that going.
Yeah.
I first discovered Dustin with the theme for Transparent. And honestly, hearing that music, I never really watched the show outside of the pilot, I think. I don't know why. But that just stuck with me. I think I Shazammed it or looked it up because I was like, oh my God, this is the most beautiful piece of music I've heard in a long time. And it literally stuck in my head, and I was humming it like weeks after. Yeah, it's just so memorable and beautiful and so distinct. I love that. I love the power of film or TV in that circumstance, opening up a lane for discovery for an artist.
I have a funny story about that. When he did, started on that first season of Transparent, I think he ended up doing 6 seasons, including some of the score for the film that they did, the musical. But so first season came out, and again, I was fully into trying to figure it all out. Dustin and I both. We were holding hands, and we were being like, okay, what do we do next? Who do we call next? What do we have to do? And so we had to learn what all his award stuff was. Like, okay, how do we get into this awards world? Which is actually a really fascinating story because later on, a lot of my guys were nominated and won some big time awards.
Right.
So I was like, Dustin, I keep seeing in these trades that Transparent and the actors in the TV show are being on these lists for Emmys. And I'm like, is there any reason why we can't be in that conversation? And so when we spoke about it, we kind of did a little research and we went back and we looked at all of the history of who wins Emmys in television and film. Or not, is it film? No, it's not film, television. And, there was no simple Transparent theme song piano melodies that had ever won anything like that, nor the score. And so I was like, yeah, but don't you think that if you are somebody that votes on this stuff and you hear the same sort of big, dramatic, sweeping score music for theme shows, or theme songs, don't you think if you put that in there as they're listening to them all, that one would be the one that they would remember the most after they listened to all of them? And he's like, oh man, I bet you they would. And so I called Chandler Poling from White Bear PR, and I was like, I didn't know him that well because we hadn't really worked together, but I've met him at some parties. And I said, Chandler, here's my idea. I really think that we would get a serious look. I don't even care if we win. I just want to be in these lists because it's part of my momentum. And so we went for it, and he won, right? And we were like, holy Jesus, we just won an award. But it was fun. It was a fun experience. And that was definitely fake it till you make it. That was definitely like, it's like a lot of the times that I do in my management careers, I try to not think about what society says is the thing that you're supposed to do or what history says is the pattern that you have to follow. I try to think about it in like, does this make sense to me in the simplest term? And then I call my friends that aren't involved in the music business and I say, hey, what do you think about this idea? Because they're not clouded by whatever repetition society says that you're supposed to do in the industry. And then I have a feedback loop with the people. And so same thing with Transparent. That's what happened there. But it was pretty cool. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that pretty much put him, I guess, on the map as far as, I mean, when you win an award like that, it brings a lot of attention, I would imagine, and opportunity. Yeah,
well, he got then a year before that, he did this movie called Like Crazy, which won the Audience Award at Sundance. And at that point, we just started working with Patty McMillan, his agent, and she just started her own agency because she quit first artist management at the time, and so it was like a Jerry Maguire moment. Where she was like, I'm starting my own agent. Who's coming with me? And me and Dustin were like, we are, right? We're going to do it. And now she's got like one of the coolest agencies in Hollywood.
Wow.
So you want me to tell you about the rest of that chapter?
Yeah. I'd love to hear
the
whole story.
So as all that was happening, all of my friends were reinventing what they were supposed to be doing with their lives and what new music business position they were taking. And I had came to this conclusion that I was like, oh my God, I do so much work for these bands and there's so little return. And at the time I kept thinking like, man, I wish I would just get lucky like some of these other managers that I know. And then I realized I'm like, luck is not given, luck is earned. And so I thought, I'm going to do my own popular culture progression step. And I thought, if this film thing is working for me right now, this television film thing, why don't I just go all in? Rather than water it down, why don't I just go for it? Start this new kind of management company, somebody that finds musicians that I consider could easily be, composers for film, television, dance, and theater, and we can work on it together and try to like get to the level of where they want to be with their goals. So I decided to do it. So I stopped working with everybody that I was working with at the time on the rock and indie rock and electronic. And I was in Italy at the time with Dustin, and we were at this wine bar, and we saw this guy Hauschka play, and fell in love with him. And I told him about my management company, and I organized a 10-city tour for him and Dustin, and we became really good friends. And so I started working with him on a composer level. And then shortly after that, Dustin and I were in Brighton signing a label deal with Fat Cat.
Oh, wow.
And Johan Johansson was in town, and I was a huge fan. And Johan just signed to Fat Cat too. And so we went and had lunch with him. And the next day after his concert, I said, here's my new management company. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. I don't really know what I'm doing, but look at me and Dustin just accomplished. You want to hold our hands, and let's all try to figure this whole thing out together. Because for him, doing internationally recognized films and theater projects was something that was like that was his goal, his ultimate goal. So I'm like, well, let's do it together. And he's like, so he signed on. So then I had my big three. And then my new Redbird music was then reshaped. The big pivot had happened at that point. I had abandoned the first chapter of my management career, and I had moved on to the second chapter of my management career.
Wow, that instinct and doubling down and doing that obviously is, paid off as far as, just it seems like you're in a lane you're supposed to be in.
Yeah. Well, it's great for me now because, I was starting to get a little older and I hated going out to clubs, and I'm sober 20 years and like...
Oh, congrats.
I just didn't I was losing my passion for having my finger on the pulse of that genre, and it wasn't making any money for me at the time, and I was way better at this other thing. So, along the way, I just keep trying to figure out how to do things. And so a few years later, Johan won a Golden Globe for The Theory of Everything and was nominated for an Academy Award. And then he was nominated for All That Stuff for Arrival and Sicario. And then I got Dustin and Folker. They did a film together called Lion, and they were nominated for an Academy Award and a Golden Globe and a BAFTA. And so things were rolling for us. And I started to expand my roster a little bit. And in this year, the guys just got shortlisted for their film, the music in this film, Ammonite. So yeah. We're not in the last 5, but we're in the first 15, which I think they call the shortlist.
Yeah.
So who knows? Never know.
Yeah, that's great. I think the other thing that's really fantastic about this is all of those films that you mentioned there are all really quality and memorable pieces of art in and of themselves. So as difficult as it probably is to find any work in that environment, to be able to work with such distinguished directors on amazing projects like that consistently is probably no easy feat either.
You know, let me tell you something that I've learned, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I feel really lucky that, you know, directors, producers that make cool films, they also listen to cool music. And so if you have clients that are making their own records the way that they want to without anybody telling them how to make it, so it's their creative output, and the directors fall in love with what they're doing and what they're good at already, and they say, I want to hire Johan Johansson because I love his records, they're not going to ask you to reinvent yourself when they ask you to do their... Of course, you have to work with a team because it's a team thing.
Right.
But because that happens, you have these really... Like Denis Villeneuve, the guy that did Prisoners and Sicario and Arrival and Blade Runner, and now he's doing Dune. You know, he's an ultra cool musical film nerd. And the fact that he called Johan before Johan had done a big film and say, this is the guy that I want. If you want me to do Prisoners, I need to have Johan do it. Wow. So everybody took a chance on us together. But it's that kind of thinking that allows us to be aligned with those films. And it all stems from the guys making their own records and leading with that first. And so that's why, I mean, I feel lucky that I didn't actually have to convince anybody to do this. They found the music.
Right, okay.
So it's real, authentic, creative finding, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's, I would venture to say from my understanding of it, there aren't a lot of composers for film and TV that have their own career initially, like pre being known for that outside of the work they do in that environment. So to have that bedrock and then have people come to them because of it, the way you just described, is a very unique kind of path to take into that world, I would imagine. I
think the biggies are Trent Reznor and Danny Elfman, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some outliers, but those are almost, you could argue, well, Danny maybe not so much, but his relationship, with Tim Burton, I think was unique. As far as opportunities go. Oingo Boingo wasn't a very popular band in the way that Nine Inch Nails was, but still, I mean, to see Trent and Atticus do a Disney Pixar film is pretty amazing. It shows the scope of what their possibility and opportunities can be, and it's also a beautiful piece of work.
So good. So good.
Yeah. It's just, I imagine those opportunities are fewer and far between. So how do you guys navigate that and stay kind of consistent with the work? I mean, because a film project like that, I would assume takes months to years maybe to complete from start to finish, so what's the trajectory of how much you can take on and how you vet opportunities and can keep that consistent?
It actually is it is a balance, and most composers don't need a management company like mine. They need the agent, because a lot of the agencies call themselves management companies. But the uniqueness of my roster is that there are musicians that record albums first, put records out on cool labels and go on tour and have a profile and a fan base for their music. And then they're composers for film, television, dance, and theater second. And so what my role becomes is I'm more of a team leader than a manager a lot of the times, where I have all these people that are covering both sides of the aisle, and I just need to make sure that it's all synced up and that the guys have enough time to do everything without having, mental cloudiness. Because a lot of times when you start stacking things on top of each other, then your mental wellness starts to go to shit. That's what happened to Johan Johansson. It's part of the reason why he died. So, in a case of like Dustin O'Halloran, he could do 20 films a year if he wanted to. But for us, it's about trusting our agent, Patty McMillan, and reading scripts and looking at the quality of the history of the people that are making the film. But I also have to plan everything 3 to 4 years out in advance now. Record, because like Dustin just did a deal with Deutsche Grammophon last year, and so he's planning on releasing 2 records, one this year and then one probably at the end of next year. And we're already working on the art assets for all that stuff. And that's 2 years away. But if we don't do it, a guy like Denis Villeneuve is going to call and say,
right.
I need you to work for the next 3 months. We have to be able to shapeshift,
Right.
But you know what? I got to tell you, there's, especially in the case of when Johann was still around, he had to pass on so many projects that we cried ourselves to sleep after passing. Because there was
just because of timing and just like you said, the fatigue component of it, there's only so much you can do.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then, because if you start, there are some composers that will build out bigger teams and say, oh yeah, I can do more because I have more people.
Right.
But we can't do that because the integrity of our score work has to be aligned with the integrity of our recording work. And
Right.
if our fan base is watching us and we start to water down the quality and the tone and the aesthetic and the fingerprint, they notice. And that number one priority is the fan base of our careers. And so we can't screw with that. We can't water it down too much. And so we have to be protective.
Yeah. You mentioned fan base as well. I mean, I think your sensibilities with your history and the type of composers / artists you work with, I mean, I imagine there is a decent fan base out there at this point for, a lot of the composers you work with. So how do you engage with that, and how is that similar and also different, I suppose, in some respects to, the way you would with a standard artist? I mean, because a lot of what we just talked about was kind of industry focused, right? Like finding partnerships with, through the agent with directors for opportunities for work. But I imagine you're probably in a unique position working with composers, thinking about it from an artist focus perspective.
Well, there's a couple of things that I can lend to whoever's listening that might think that this is interesting. One of the reasons why I think that I was successful early on in getting the industry to take us seriously for the awards, the Golden Globes and the Academy Awards, is that I've always come from this DIY, all hands on deck. Like when we were working with Josh Rouse back in the day, is whoever was working, we were all synergized and synced up and trying to work towards a common goal. So what I would do then is if we were doing a campaign, an industry campaign, I would then talk to my record labels and everybody on that side, and I would sometimes have 3 different PR campaigns going towards the same thing, because I was trying to connect the dots into creating a momentum towards this Academy Awards thing. And it worked because, I think that a lot of the people that vote on that kind of stuff, they also pay attention to other kind of music trades. And so if they see your name a bunch of times, it gives you the confidence to tick that box.
Right.
But, on the other side, this is super interesting. Johann Johansson, he had a solid fan base, throughout his life. He put out records on 4AD and, Deutsche Grammophon and Fat Cat. But so like when I met him, he was doing, when he would go on tour, he would probably do 200 people, 250 people a night when he would go to different cities. And so when we won the Golden Globe and were nominated for Academy Awards, this goes into my sort of fake it till you make it naive, I'm gonna figure this out as I go thing. I called my agent, Todd Walker, and I was like, hey, so we have this thing. Like, people know who we are now. Like, let's set up a tour. Let's take this information, send it out to the promoters. Not only is this Johann Johansson of old, this is Johann Johansson of Golden Globe winner fame.
Right.
Didn't move the needle a bit.
Oh.
We went into some of these bigger places, and we ended up playing, to empty 500. We would go into like 1,000 capacity rooms, and there would be like 400 people there. And so it really takes a Hans Zimmer style career to push a live concert atmosphere or ticket sales up. It really does.
Yeah.
Because the concert goer doesn't necessarily, I mean, I'm generalizing, but in my experience, just because you're a big-time composer or a recognized composer, it doesn't mean that people are going to buy your tickets to see you play live, because there's a disconnection.
Right, yeah. They're used to hearing that talent in music matched up with motion picture. And when you disconnect that, there's probably a small subset of people that, really dig into just the music component, even though I would say the composers you work with warrant that more than most. It's still a small subset, and probably, and maybe those fans just don't go to live shows too, or don't go out in the same kind of capacity.
You're right. I still don't know, because I really thought, I was like, hey, Todd, this is going to be great. And then it wasn't. And then when Johan asked me, hey, what happened? I told him, I don't know.
Yeah.
But, you have to put a spoonful of risk in your shake every year. Otherwise, you're not going to learn anything. And so that was a learning experience for me.
Yeah. And who's to say that if you tweaked and had an opportunity to continue to do that in different capacities, if it wouldn't have yielded results that were, sustainable eventually in certain places.
Yeah. Yeah, like doing some live score to film type events, so that there's a mental connection to the two. Like, we were going to start doing that. I'm doing some stuff like that with Colin Stetson right now, where he's going to take his band and perform in front of some of the films that he had scored. So.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I love that.
Me too.
Yeah, there seems to be being based here in Minnesota, and recently I was talking with my friend Laserbeak, who did a project with the Minnesota Orchestra with Dessa. And there seems to be, certain orchestras are interested in exploring different non-traditional relationships. So that is one place where maybe you have a built-in audience. It's used to going to the orchestra, has season tickets, and you bring in a composer for film and can match that up in a way that maybe it's hard to do in other capacities, in other markets. You know
who the leader is in this sort of middle ground between regular musicians and neoclassical ambient composers is? Have you ever met Kate Nordstrom from Liquid in Minneapolis?
Yeah, I met her a couple of times. Yeah, she's definitely passionate towards all that.
Whenever I talk to anybody, my publishers, my record labels, whatever, I always say, how can we get into that different audience? And then they would always say, let me call Kate. Because she's still like the leader in that world. Like, if you want your artist to capture a more, I don't want to say core classical, but sort of a more artsy thinking crowd, she has done the best job out of Minneapolis with Liquid music than anybody that I've met.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's very true. Yeah, and we're fortunate because we do have a progressive orchestra. We have the Walker Art Museum, which is unique as well. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, I think, that playing that naive card, you just have to do that, and hopefully it compounds over time.
Yeah.
I'm excited to hear that Dustin has some solo records coming up.
It's been a while. I think Lumiere came out in 2009. That's his last studio album. I mean, he's released a couple of A Winged Victory for the Sullen albums along the years, because that's his band. But no solo album. So they're really good.
Yeah. No, that's great. So do you have a lot of, obviously you have your core group of composers and artists that you work with. Have you had, because you're kind of carving out a unique space in this world, have you had a lot of inquiries towards that, or do you find yourself still kind of just piecemealing it together a little bit? It sounds like, working with Colin and other artists like that, it sounds like you're expanding your roster a bit from when I first realized the work you were doing in this arena. But do you feel like there's room for growth, or anybody else out there is even doing anything close to what you're doing, really?
Well, the guys that, gosh, I forget the name of the company, Dean, but they manage Yonsei and Alex Summers and Sigur Rós. They're doing a lot of this type stuff because we keep crossing, we keep collaborating on projects together. they're the only management company that's kind of similar to what I'm doing. But I get a lot of emails and calls from established composers that want help with their, they want to be a recording artist. And it's harder to go that way. It's harder to go left.
Yeah.
Because I've tried it. A good friend of mine who's, I won't name him, but he's an extremely successful film composer, and he had a record, and we did a big campaign. We got a label on board. We did all this stuff, but I think that it's hard to. The idea of going on tour and the idea of living a rock and roll life, the idea of getting in a bus, and the idea of dedicating that amount of detail to being a touring musician, recording musician, I think it's hard for a lot of. I think it would be hard for a lot of composers, because at home, if they're going to get like a TV show or a film, that's going to pay them $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, and when they go on tour, they're probably going to lose money for a couple of years. It's hard. It's hard to do the switch. So what I've found that for me, because I have an office in Berlin too, it's after Johann passed away. There's still business to be done with the Johann Johansson estate, because there was a couple of unfinished records and a film that he was working on at the time. So the last couple of years I've been doing that. And so last year was the first chance that I could take that I thought, okay, I have some space now. And Colin Stetson was the guy that Johann and I had worked with on Arrival and Sicario, doing some sounds for us. And he and I started talking because he was starting to do films like Hereditary and Barkskins and The First. He was doing some really cool films, and he's really good at it. And so I was able to take him on as a management client. But it's really unique for me, because there has to be a commitment to the album side in order for me to work with somebody, because like I said earlier, nobody needs me if they just want to be a film composer. So there has to be more. There has to be film. Right. There has to be dance. There has to be theater. I'm trying to convince this woman, Shida Shahabi, to work with me right now. She's on 130701 Records, which is part of Fat Cat. Her music is just so amazing, and she's starting to do some film work. And so hopefully I can convince her to work with me, and then I'm going to stop for a little while. Yeah. Stop bringing new people in.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like such a unique lane that you've carved out, that it also requires a really unique artist/composer to kind of fit that mold.
It does.
For all the reasons you discussed. But I think it's terribly exciting when you look at, like I mentioned before, there's so many artists I know that are like, how do I get into the film thing? How does this work? There seems to be a plethora of opportunity there, but a skill set that is quite different, than just being an artist, and one that's hard to navigate as a whole. And I would say most, general music managers, artist managers, don't really have the capacity or knowledge really to navigate that world for when it comes to composing in general for film and TV, beyond song syncs and opportunities of that nature. So I think what you're doing is pretty fascinating, and it's been fun to watch.
Thanks. It's fun for me, It's fun.
Yeah, and and it seems like you take a very, naive's probably too strong of a word, really, when you think about it. I think it's just, it's almost at this point probably less naive and more being naive and more just being like, how do we do something fun and different, and that's a good energy to continue.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. A few years ago, I read this book by the guy Ed Catmull, who was one of the founders of Pixar, and it's called Creativity Inc.
Yeah,
it's one of my favorite books of all time, because one of the principles in the book is he talks about the art of making mistakes and not getting down on yourself for making mistakes. Right? Mm-hmm. And so I've, luckily for me, convinced myself that when I make mistakes, I should be really happy about it because something good is about to come from those mistakes. I've gotten past that because that's how they used to treat these Pixar mistakes back in the day. They would get worried if their mistakes didn't come until later in the project because they knew it would cost them more money. If they made the mistakes early on, they could fix it, and they would, it would cost money, but they could adjust. And so I feel really lucky that I have that mindset now to where I make mistakes every day, but I celebrate most of them because I'm like, shit, well, at least I got that out of the way. So it does good. It does good for me, I think.
Yeah, and that's a hard lesson to learn. I'm not, I know you have a kid. I'm a parent too, so it's like trying to teach that. Yeah. Trying to distill it in yourself is one thing, and I'll freely admit I'm not very good at it. Mistakes usually kind of, cause me to devolve for a moment instead of finding the joy in it. But trying to teach that to my children is a whole other thing, because it's like if you can get past that, life A is so much better, and B, you stumble into things that you wouldn't have otherwise. I think that's a huge life lesson, and a great point that you bring up. Well, man, thank you so much for chatting through all this. Before we wrap up, I do want to toss a few questions your way, which are always fun.
Of course.
I thought about revamping these a little bit, considering the touch point with composers and film and TV, but I think we'll just keep it. Unless you want to, toss some of that in, feel free. But I think we'll kind of keep it in the music lane if that feels best to you. So, what was the first record that you ever bought that was like kind of meaningful and significant in your life?
Oh gosh, this is an easy one. I was 4, and my brother and I saved up our allowance, and because Kiss Alive 2 came out on vinyl. And that was 1974, because I'm 50 now. And the thing that I remember the most about opening up that piece of vinyl, and this is when I was living in Edina, is the smell. Like when you open up those old vinyls, and it was a gatefold, and so you open it up and you take the wax out. It had this like 1974 wax smell.
Wow.
And we put it on, and I got to act like Ace Frehley on the bed. My brother was Gene, and my other brother was Peter. It was a real thing for us.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
My answer to that question is usually the Synchronicity from the Police was the first record I bought. But that's actually not true. The first record I bought was the soundtrack to Empire Strikes Back.
Really?
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about. I still have it, but I'm thinking like, what's an artist that I bought, not a soundtrack. But I actually remember saving up my allowance and buying. I was such a, Star Wars freak in 1980, and I wanted a soundtrack, and I'd listen to it over and over again. It's a
so
classic,
good.
amazing.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Do you happen to remember the first cassette that you ever got?
Oh, that's, so funny enough, Synchronicity I bought on vinyl in probably 84 maybe. Came out in 83, probably bought it in 84. But cassettes took over right at that point. That was kind of the tipping point. So that was the last record I actually bought for a long time because I went into cassettes. But I'm trying to think of what my first cassette was. I became a pretty, and still am, passionate fan of Genesis, and around that same time it might have been the self-titled Genesis record from 83, 84 on cassette. Yeah,
mine was the Men at Work.
Oh yeah. Cargo.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I come from the land of Unda.
Yeah, that's great.
I played that thing over and over.
Yeah, I remember when MTV used to show concerts, and I remember a Men at Work concert that they showed, like an hour-long concert. So, that's one thing I missed about MTV in the early days. They showed so much live music.
Yeah.
And they kind of steered away from that over the years, outside of Unplugged and the award shows, but for the most part. But, oh, man. Yeah, that's hilarious. So what was this is a nice segue into the next question. What was the first concert you went to?
Kiss.
Was it? Wow. Shortly thereafter?
Yeah. Well, no. It's actually many years after. I want to say 14, and my friend's dad, I was living in Aberdeen, South Dakota, and Kiss was playing in Fargo, which is 2.5 hours north of us. And so my friend's dad agreed to let us all sit in the back of the truck. There was like 6 of us. And we went up there, and it was Kiss and this band King Cobra. So that was my first rock concert, yeah.
That's cool that you saw Kiss in Fargo, because they're widely known to have played all those tertiary markets. Back in the day, and developed that where they could basically tour constantly. So that's awesome.
There was probably, and this is of course memory to recall, there was probably 7,500 people there.
Wow.
When they could have done 25,000 people or something like that. It definitely was what you're saying. What was your first rock concert, or any concert?
Yeah, my first rock concert was, we took my dad to, my sisters and I pitched in and bought tickets, and I was the lucky one to get to go to see ZZ Top.
Whoa! Back when they had dirt underneath their fingernails.
Well, a little bit. It was on the Afterburner tour, so it would have been like 85, 86. So, but it was great. It was fun. I mean, I was hooked as far as going to shows after that. I was just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And the funny thing is, like 20 years later, I took my dad to see them again right around Father's Day when I was living in Nashville, which was kind of cool. Yeah, it was kind of neat to kind of relive that whole experience. Working in the industry and doing that at that point was like, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I added this question post-pandemic, but what was the last concert you went to? Do you still go see shows much?
Well, I guess it couldn't be one of my own.
It can be, but in general, like, what was the last?
Well, the last concert I saw, I was in January, at the end of January 2020. I was in London, and I saw Winged Victory for the Sullen at this place called Round Chapel. They had nice. three gigs there, and so that was the last live concert that I saw. Wow.
Do you? I assume you probably had opportunities on a fairly regular basis to see films in theaters. Do you miss that? What's the last time you saw a movie with an audience in a theater, I guess I should say?
I got to tell you, man, like, I am a hugest fan of going to movies.
Yeah, me too.
You know what happened to me? I don't even know how to explain it, but when the pandemic started, that was sort of like the time to be around and binge watch stuff and watch TV. I don't watch TV anymore. I stopped. And like every once in a while, like I'll watch my clients' shows and movies, but my buddy Zach and I, we get together at least once, if not twice a month. He works for Ziggy Marley's company. Once, if not twice a month, just to go and like bro down and watch movies. I love it so much.
That's great.
I miss that second most. I miss going to my gym first most, and I miss going to movies second most.
Yeah, movies is high on a lot of people's list. I think I like it more, and I think I miss it more than music in some respects, just because if I have 2 hours to kill and nothing else to do, there's always a decent movie almost any time during the day to go see. And it's a great, escapism, where music you have to be more live music you have to be more intentional with, and it's more of an event. But I totally miss those opportunities and look forward to that. I did go see a movie. A friend of ours rented out an old movie theater here for their son's birthday.
Did they?
Just sitting back in the fall. And we were all distanced out, and there was only like 10 of us in there in a 400 capacity, theater. But it was emotional. Like, I got teary-eyed just being in a theater again. I so miss that.
I bet. Last July for my daughter's 9th birthday, my girlfriend and I took her out to a drive-in to see Goonies.
Oh, cool! Wow.
It was so fun, man.
Wow.
It was so fun.
Yeah, it's cool.
I hadn't been to a drive-in since I was a kid in Minneapolis.
Yeah, there's quite a few still up here. We planned on doing that last year and never had the opportunity to. It didn't come together, but this year, and the fact that drive-ins are coming back because of this is interesting. And bands are doing drive-in shows as well, which is just fascinating.
Yeah, super fascinating. I'd go see Genesis at a drive-in.
Hell yeah! I hope they actually do these shows. I know they filmed rehearsals last fall, but if they keep pushing this stuff back, I don't know. I certainly hope the pandemic doesn't derail that opportunity.
Yeah, I've just read something about, the Who was going to do some last dates.
Oh, really?
Right before the pandemic, and probably not anymore.
Yeah, you got to think that it's. I mean, how do you put? Well, and then you think of like the Rolling Stones too. It's like, I mean, can you really afford to travel around? I mean, I guess you can afford to do it, but why would you take the risk at that point? And, even post-pandemic, I don't know. Yeah, definitely.
Plus, like when you get to their age, and I mean, I don't know how old those guys are, but they're getting older. It's like me coming home from work, knowing that I have to go out later and sitting on the couch. If I sit on the couch, there's a very small chance I'm actually going to go out later.
Right, exactly.
So the pandemic is sitting on the couch. Now they have to get up.
Right, yeah. I think you're right. I think a lot of musicians are going to be like, I kind of like it at home. This is kind of nice.
Yeah.
Oh, I think that's hilarious. Well, what's something you've heard recently that you're just a huge fan of that kind of took you by surprise? I
got to tell you, I mentioned earlier, I'm trying to convince Sheeta Shahabi to work with me. And, I had seen her on some playlists recently. And I listened to her music, but Dave from Fat Cat called me and he was like, "Hey, Tim, I want to talk to you about somebody." And, it's Sheeta Shahabi. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, so you're telling me that she doesn't have management and she wants to get into film and television and dance and theater?" And he's like, "Yeah, and I really, I wanted you to have a conversation with her." So I really did a deep dive into her music and her score work, and she's blowing my mind. I hope that she works with me. Part of it is I love her music so much. That's the first point. The second point is, thankfully to two things. Thankfully to me having a daughter, and thankfully to the Black Lives Matter movement for opening up my eyes and asking my black and brown friends about experience in their lives. I've turned into a much more empathic person in that way. And so when I look at my roster now, not that I have any issue with it, but, it's all white guys. And so I love her music so much, but, I want to learn and I want to grow. And the idea of working with an Iranian-born female composer, it allows me to peel back another layer of myself, to learn from her and to help her. So I hope that she works with me.
Yeah, I hope so too. That sounds great. One last question real quick. What do you do, or what do you like to do, or what brings you joy outside of, music and film and all of that? Since you're so intertwined in that, like what really, I always find it fascinating to ask folks, like, because we're also passionate about what we work on all the time. What else is out there that really brings you happiness and joy?
Well, I can sit in the moment for this, in that I'm a dog psychology nerd, and I feel one of the lucky bits of being home through the pandemic is that I have a 10-month-old Labradoodle. And growing up, I worked in nursing homes when I lived in South Dakota and stuff. And so I have a liking for our elderly. I love sitting and talking and sharing and being in the presence of our elderly community. And so I've started training her to be a therapy dog. And so she's passed her first 3 American Kennel Club tests. And on her first birthday at the end of March, she goes and does her evaluation for this society here in LA that connects you with, children's hospitals and nursing homes.
Wow.
And part of it is I want to make sure that Pony sees what service is. I want her to be able to understand that we all have an obligation to somehow step into giving back, however that looks. And so she's going to go with me. So she's been training honeybuzz with me. And so that's my new passion right now, is this dog psychology.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yeah, it's really fun. And we have and we started a fish tank during the quarantine.
Oh, cool. Wow.
Yeah, it's so fun.
Oh, that's great. Oh, man. Thanks for sharing that and all of this. I appreciate you taking the time to chat, and so good to reconnect.
Yeah, good to see you too. Yeah, when I come home next December, if you're around, we should go and have a lunch.
Please. Absolutely. I would love that. Yeah, anytime you're back in the cities, let me know. I want to thank Tim for taking the time to chat with us today and for sharing his various experiences with us. As always, if you're so inclined, please rate us, follow us on socials at Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Tough Love Pod. That's TOUGHLOVPOD. And above all, share this podcast with your friends and fellow music industry and artist communities. It takes a village. You can reach us at Chris@Anadonia Management, that's CHRIS@ANHEDONIAMGMT.com. Be well, trip up, get back up, and let's all learn as we go. Until next time.